FDD Group. Mr Farage.
Really rather exciting, isn't it? It's referendum season, and the referendum is coming on the 6th of April in the Netherlands, where they're going to have a referendum on the Ukrainian deal, and the opinion polls show they are going to reject it. And just today, Mr Orban has announced there is going to be a referendum in Hungary, where they're going to have a referendum on whether they should be forced to accept mandatory quotas for migrants after the grievous errors of the EU's common asylum policy, not to mention Mrs Merkel's pronouncements. And overnight we get a Czech Premier telling us that there is now demand building in the Czech Republic to have a referendum on membership. Oh, and I nearly forgot. There's going to be a British referendum on June the 23rd on whether we remain or leave the European Union. And this follows a 40-hour summit where Mr Cameron, doing his modern-day impression of Oliver Twist, went up to Mr Tusk and said, "Please, sir, can I have some more concessions?" Well, he didn't get very much, did he? We're allowed to change ever so slightly migrant benefits for a short period of time, and we're told that in future we won't be committed to ever closer union. And on the basis of all of that, we're going to have a referendum that the Prime Minister says on a deal that is legally binding. And indeed, Mr Tusk joined in with this today by saying the British deal was legally binding. To top that off, Mr Cameron has told us that he will lodge the deal, he will lodge the documents at the United Nations. But frankly, you might as well lodge an old pair of socks, because it's completely meaningless. The fact that you lodge a document there, you could use a safety deposit box. But is this deal legally binding, Mr Tusk? Well, the ECJ themselves said in 2008 that the obligations imposed by an international agreement cannot have the effect of prejudicing the constitutional principles of the EU treaties, which means the ECJ rule in favour of the existing treaties until we get a new treaty. But who's to say there's going to be a new treaty? Any new treaty would trigger yet more referendums and would not be favoured, I think, by the big groups in this Parliament. But of course we have an emergency brake. That's being judged to be a great success. But, crucially, that happens through secondary legislation that can be voted on by this Parliament. So what happens? We have a referendum, we follow Mr Cameron, we vote to remain, and then we come back to this Parliament. Is this Parliament going to support British exceptionalism? And I think we've heard voices today that make it perfectly clear that that will not happen. So the deal, Mr Tusk, and Mr Cameron, if you're listening, is not legally binding in any way at all. And I have to say the British public will decide which is our safest option. Is it safe to stay within an organisation whose own police boss tells us there are 3,000 to 5,000 terrorists that have now come into our continent through the migrant crisis, or is it safest to take back control of our own borders and our own democracy? After much consideration, I have decided to opt to vote for us to leave.
Herr Farage, es gibt eine.
Thank you, Mr Farage. There is a question from Mr Casa. Will you accept that? Mr Casa, please.
Thank you, Mr Chairman. Well, we all know that Mr Farage has been working for Britain to leave since I joined here in Parliament 11 years ago. He has tried local elections in the United Kingdom, but he didn't have any success, did he? Then he went for the general elections in the United Kingdom, hardly a success there. On the contrary, he secured a bigger majority for David Cameron and the Conservative Party. Now, if in the referendum, which he always wanted, the majority of the British people say yes, meaning to stay part of us in the European Union, will he call it a day and retire from politics, or would he want another chance to stay here, enjoying the company of us Europeans?
Well, Mr. Kaza, I don't know who's been briefing you on UKIP's electoral history. You perhaps haven't got a very good memory, I'm not sure. But in 2014, with 28% of the vote, UKIP won the European elections, topping the poll across the United Kingdom, the first time since 1906 that a party that wasn't Labour or the Conservatives had won a national election. So I hope that brings you up to speed. As for the referendum, yeah, I believe it is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. I'm certain that if we vote to remain, we're unlikely ever to get another opportunity, and we will sink deeper inside this political union. But I think there's every chance now that the momentum is on our side of the argument, and so yes, we're going to vote to leave, and within a short period of time, all the British MEPs will be gone. How about that?